Good morning, everybody. That's for the Q&A, isn't it? Yeah. Hopefully you can hear me with this mic all right. Yep. Otherwise I'll shout. Just checking. Are we ready to kick off? Okay, welcome all. My name's Andrew Josie. I'm from the Open Group. Here I'm a VP of Standards and Certification at the Open Group. So I look after the standards process, which is basically the rules about how we develop standards. I also run our certification business. So in fact, I won't be talking particularly about TOGAF certification, but I am able to answer lots of questions if you've got questions about what we've been doing with the certification program here today. We're here at the TOGAF User Group. Today we're looking at the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. Particular aspect of it is what we call the TOGAF Series Guides, and I'll put that into context as well in a minute in my first session. So we'll be having welcoming a group of speakers. Basically, these are all authors of the various parts of the standard, so authors of the TOGAF Series Guides, and I'll be introducing them. We've got Dave Hornford here, Chris Frost, and Dave's actually doing two, and Celine, I think I saw she was here, or she will be here in a minute. Celine is also going to present, and I'll introduce our speakers as we go. We're running up until 1 o'clock, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. And so now there are some books that are giveaways. If you've not got any, if you'd like copies of the TOGAF Standard, they're actually downstairs where the coffee is. We've got a table just in the corner of the room with lots of books on. So if you need a copy of any of the volumes of the TOGAF Standard, you can go down there and get that. I brought a small selection up here. I didn't bring them all. Okay, so I guess without further ado, we'll kick off. I'm going to talk briefly, give you an introduction to the TOGAF Series Guides and what they're about. Let me just see if I can get this going. Okay, so I'm going to be giving you a very quick look at the TOGAF Standard, a look at how we've organized it, how we've reorganized it, why we've reorganized it. One thing we had heard in the development of the TOGAF Standard was that people want, our practitioners, they wanted more guidance, better guidance, more topical guidance. And the way we facilitated that is actually by making a big change to the structure. And we'll be talking about the structure. And by changing the structure, we're actually able to add a lot of extended content. And so you'll see that the book has changed. If you imagine TOGAF, the book, the standard being the book, used to be like one single book, I think it was 500 or 600 pages. And now that's actually been split out. That bit has been split out. But now we've actually got in total 28 documents as of just this last week. It was 26 when we launched last April, and we've actually added 2 new documents to that, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. Did I click 2 there? I think I clicked 2. So yeah, this is the modular structure. This is sort of a diagram really showing you about how you can find the standard. If you imagine the Open Group has the Open Group library, so that's where we put all of our standards in, so across the different topics. If you see those 5 boxes at the top there, I think actually I might even have a laser here, I don't know, yeah, there's a laser here. If you look at these 5, you'll see various topics, so TOGAF, Archimate, IT for IT, DPBot, Security Library. If you click into the TOGAF library, that brings you into our content specifically around the TOGAF Standard. We have a number of items in there, so there's white papers, guides, sort of supporting material for the standard, and then we have the standard itself. Now, if you look at the standard now, you'll actually see it's divided into 2 types of content. So we've got what we call the TOGAF Fundamental Content. Now, you can think of that as almost equivalent to what was the 9.2 standard. We've actually, sort of modularized that, so we've actually broken that out from 1 book into 6 documents. That is considered the stable and enduring content, so that is really the what. And what we've added to that is a set of documents called the TOGAF Series Guides here, which are supposed to be the how-to. And the idea is they'll be more dynamic, they will evolve, and we'll be adding new content, which is indeed what we've just recently added, 2 new TOGAF Series Guides to that content. So if we look at the standard, as I mentioned, there are basically the 6 documents, the TOGAF Fundamental Content, and to that we've actually added 20 TOGAF Series Guides. This is the picture as of last April, so this is 1 year ago. And what I haven't had time to do is to update this slide to add the 2 new documents that we've added. So when you look at this, we've got here in Customer Master Data Management, we've just added also Metadata Management as a new one. And in the business sort of architecture area, which is sort of up here, we've also just added Business Capability Planning as a new TOGAF Series Guide. So if you go out to the standard now, you will see an additional 2 documents there. The standard is available in a number of different formats. So as you see here at the front, and as you'll see downstairs, we have the hard copy edition. So there we've taken a selection of the documents. We've not printed all 28 documents. I think there's equivalent of about 15 of them are actually encapsulated in the hard copy. You can pick up things like there's an architecture development method guide, and that actually includes the 3 documents that are sort of related to that topic area in them. A little tip for you there, if you look at the color of the spine, the green actually means it's fundamental content, and the purple actually means it's a TOGAF Series Guide. We also have what we call our digital editions. So we have a sort of a little graphical entry. You can go, if you go to the Open Group homepage, you click down to the TOGAF Standard 10th edition, you get this sort of graphic that you can then click in that takes you into the text version. One thing that we wanted to do with the standard as we came along to the 10th edition was, to ensure continuity. So if you're familiar with the version 9 standard, 9.2, you will recognize a lot of the content. So you will see, you'll see things such as the catalogs, matrices, and diagrams. You'll recognize obviously the architecture development method, the crop circle, the partitioning models. All those things are brought forward, and those are in the fundamental content. So just explaining how we reorganized the fundamental content. So we took the one book and we sort of split that out. And this has been split into these 6 guides. So you can see the architecture development method being supported by techniques, a guide on how to apply the ADM, obviously architecture content, capability and governance, so how you things like architecture board, architecture compliance, and so on. And then you've got your TOGAF Series Guides, which interwork with the fundamental content. So what we're here today really is to look at some of the TOGAF Series Guides. As I mentioned, these are really about how to configure, how to use the TOGAF standard. So rather than the what that is in the fundamental content, we have a series of books. As I mentioned, it's now 22. So there's the 6 fundamental content documents and the 22 TOGAF Series Guides. They cover a range of topics. I'll give you a couple of slides, a very brief look at some of these, and then some of our speakers today will be taking you in, diving deeper into the documents. Oops. I think I went too forward. Yeah, there we go. So there are what we call, and some of the content organization reflects what we have on the digital online edition. So if you go to our website, if you go to, in fact, if you go to pubs.opengroup.org/TOGAF Standard, that's the direct URL to get into the online edition. You'll see that we actually tend to reflect some of these categories in there. So you'll see there we've got the general how-to. So this is, developing an EA, following the ADM. We've actually got practical advice written by members of the Open Groups Architecture Forum, how to apply, the method for developing your EA. So that was something we were sort of missing. It was always the what before, rather than some actual practical advice. What does it mean in practice? And Dave Hornford is here today. He's the author, well, one of the lead authors of that book, and will be able to tell us more about that. We've got guidance on digital technology adoption, using the TOGAF standard in a digital sort of first enterprise. So we've got guidance on that. We've got domain specifics. We're particularly strong in business architecture. So I think there's now 7, it said 6 on here. There were 6 at the time I put this slide together, but as of this last week, there are now 7 business architecture TOGAF series guides. We've got a new study guide as well. So if you look, we've got a business architecture sort of set, and we've also now got a certification around that area as well. And there's a new study guide just been finished. We're working on data and information architecture. In fact, Celine, the scarp at the back, is here, and she's been leading that activity. She's actually going to tell us about a new TOGAF Series Guide that they're working on sustainability. But she's been leading that, and we've now got 2 documents there. At the time this slide together, we had customer master data management. We've just added metadata management as well. We address agile methods. So there's a couple of TOGAF series guides that look at how to apply the ADM with agility, applying the ADM using sprints, how to generally organize your enterprise architecture in an agile manner. We have a set of reference models. Some of these you will see we've carried forward from the version 9.2 standard, but also we've added some new ones, such as the digital business reference model, the government reference model. We have specific guidance on setting up and establishing an EA team. And again, we're going to look at that particular TOGAF series guide in today's session. So I won't give away too much about that. But also to say we've just also launched what we call a certification credential for being a TOGAF EA leader. Now, with all of this stuff, you may be asking, how can I get started? Well, the good news is we've got a white paper, an introduction to the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. And that really explains a lot of the motivation about the changes we made. So if you want to, read up on why, how we came to this new structure and this new organization, it's all described in there. It also gives you a few recommendations about how you can get started from different views. If you're an enterprise architect, if you're a sort of a manager, if you're a leader, where would you actually start with this documentation set? How would you approach it? How do you get in there? And also for some people who are really into the details, we've got an appendix that sort of goes into the gory details about what we changed in the TOGAF Fundamental Content as we went forward. Because obviously one thing we like to do is always sort of continuous improvement, quality sort of changes to the fundamental content. Oops, this clicker likes to bounce. As I mentioned, we have a digital edition, so obviously with 26 documents, it's a vast amount of content. So we're trying to think about, how can you approach that content? So what we've come up with is this digital, the online edition that it's supposed to make it easier for you to navigate and search all of the content, and that will be evolving continuously. So in fact, if you were watching the site in the last week, you will have noticed it expanded, and there were two new documents integrated into the online edition. So just give you a picture of the online edition here. If you do go to this starting page, it does give you links into the white paper that I mentioned. So if you want to get started, you want to read the white paper, you can just click on that link and it will take you straight into an online version of the white paper as well. We've got search capabilities, and then obviously we've got all the documents that you can jump into here as well. One thing that is new is the ability to provide feedback by the digital edition. Before, it's been quite hard to get, probably, to be truthful, it's been quite hard for you to give us feedback, and so we tried to make that much easier now. On every page in the online digital edition, you will see these little bug and comment icons, and you can click on that and it will pop up a form. It pre-fills some of the information of the form, basically telling us where you are in the document, and you can give us your comments, and that goes back, and that basically gets filed into a GitLab tracker, so it's an issue which is then raised with the architecture forum, with the standard developers. And it's been quite good. I think altogether so far in the year, we've had about 50 comments so far, and some of them are things like, oh, I'm not sure about that content, and we're like, well, that's a subjective thing, so obviously that goes back to the standard developers and they'll consider it. Other times they spot, oh, you made a typo here. So that's great, because then we can go, right, we'll go and fix that. And obviously in our tool chain, we're able to, we've been refreshing the content as we go along. So it's a way to, really shorten that cycle of finding those bugs, because when you've got that amount of content, there's bound to be, some issues in there. And sometimes they're things like caused by our conversion tools. We're taking documents written in a number of different formats and trying to present them as HTML as best we can. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today, just to give you the very brief look at the TOGAF standard, explain a little bit about how we modularized it and changed the structure, and then just give you the quick, very high-level view of some of the TOGAF series guides. And we'll be handing over to to our next speaker. And I think it's you, Dave. You're up next, aren't you, to talk about the Leader's Guide. Yep. I think. No, they don't. Have you got your? Apologies for a little bit of a changeover we need to do here. But Dave's going to be talking about the EA Leader's Guide, which we do have lots of copies of. So if you do want to get a copy of the Leader's Guide,
thoughtfully set up to make it.
That was easy enough. Some calendar up on the screen there.
Yes, sir.
Anything you didn't want to see?
All practitioner's guide.
If you go down to the bottom right here, presentation mode.
Yeah, but it's wrong deck.
Oh, right.
It's that one.
Beautiful.
And allow the accessory. There we are.
Lovely work. That's very famous. And then clicker.
Or the arrow button.
Yeah, or this. It's up to you. That one will.
That will mess with me.
And there's a laser on it as well.
I saw. Leader's Guide. How to set up an enterprise architecture practice. So Andrew went through the basic structure of the TOGAF Standard. And one of the things I find very interesting, when we were doing version 9, release 9, people were saying, oh, it's so big. The document is so big, because it was 600 pages. It's now about 2,700 pages. And the distinction is, you have 150 pages on how to run an EA team. You have 150 pages in the practitioner's guide on how to actually exercise the ADM. There's about 800 pages on how to do business architecture. The transition from the what to the how is absolutely critical. And what I'm going to talk to for this session is what's in the Leader's Guide. What's in the structure of how to enable an architecture team? Where do you go? What are the essential roots of it? So the pieces I'm going to talk about, one is deliberate design. What is it that you are attempting to accomplish for your EA team? How do you structure governance effectively? And then customizing your content and your method. What is your organizational design model for success, and what processes do you need to set up? The reason we wrote the Leader's Guide is because of a sad truth. Gartner will tell you that there has never been more spend on enterprise architecture than there is today. They'll also tell you that enterprise architecture teams have never lasted as short a period of time as they do today. So there is an absolute requirement for enterprise architecture, and most of the teams are stood up, shut down, stood up, shut down, stood up, shut down, because they're missing. That's what the guide is about, is stop missing. People want good enterprise architecture. Help them get it. Because as a profession, our struggle is, we're very smart people. We have a lot of knowledge. We have a lot of care. We care deeply about our organizations. Why are we missing? So if you want to cut to how to pull this off, if you read the Leader's Guide, it says right in the introduction, stop reading the introduction and jump to chapter 4. And then when you're done chapter 4, jump to chapter 5. So if you're in a hurry, just go right to chapter 4 and chapter 5. Chapter 4 is all about the enterprise context. What is your company? What is your company trying to accomplish? Where do you live? What's your ecosystem that you live in? Chapter 5, what does your company want from an architecture team? It will be very, very different for different organizations. If you deliver the world's best architecture that they don't want, it's an irrelevancy. The analogy we used when developing it, it doesn't matter how good your filet mignon is if your company wants a hamburger. I spend about half my time helping people set up architecture teams, and I am constantly fascinated by people who do not architect their architecture capability. For me, it's a credibility test. If you are winging your architecture capability, what are you saying about your commitment to architecture? What are you saying about your understanding of how to design a capability that's fit for purpose? Why would I trust you? So when you think about this, accidental organizations don't change the world. Accidental evolution takes bazillions of years. Your company doesn't have bazillions of years for you to evolve into the right structure. You've got to cut to deliberate design. And the Foundational Leader's Guide is 2 pieces. What does your organization want an architecture team to support them with? There's 4 basic patterns. I won't come back to them, but the 4 basic patterns are you answering a question about strategy? Are you doing portfolio change? Are you doing project change? Or are you doing solution change? Those are 4 very different models of who you serve and how you serve them. And when you line that up, it's sweet. When you misalign them, well, you're one of the groups that gets rebooted. They're really blunt about that. It's what I spend half my time doing, is helping teams who aren't getting there. So, cautionary warning. No one cares what you want to do. They care about what they want to receive from you. No one cares about what you could do if you only had a mandate, if you only had the time. It's what they want. And no one cares what another company does. Different organizations have different demands, and that's the centerpiece of Chapter 4. Enterprise context. What is your company? Are you a startup? Are you one of the Fortune 500? Is the boundary of your enterprise a part of your supply chain? Is the boundary of your enterprise an extended supply chain? So if you look at the definition of enterprise in TOGAF, it's very clear. It says the definition of an enterprise for the purpose of enterprise architecture is the boundary that you're architecting. It's not the legal decision of the organization. You want a simple example? Think about Apple. They don't make Apple stuff. My MacBook here. Somebody else does. They don't ship it. Somebody else does. If you're architecting the entire supply chain of Apple, you are including third-party manufacturers, you're including chip fabricators, you're including distribution. That's a radically different thing than if you are architecting Apple retail. And that could be your boundary. And the boundary, again, is what does your organization want architected? Where will you be valuable? Do you understand your enterprise's mission and purpose? Do you understand your strategic position? Where do you live in your market? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you fitting into your market? Are you leading your market? Are you driving your market? Those are all radically different things. And the 3 hard questions. As a leader of an architecture team, are you being stood up from scratch? Is your team being rebooted? Or are you improving it because you're successful? And if you're being rebooted, Doesn't say it strongly enough in here, and I'm really sorry we didn't put that in because they thought, my team thought I was being too blunt. If you're being rebooted, don't do what they did last time. Because it didn't work. Learn. Business objectives. Why do we do enterprise architecture? Guide effective change. Our organizations all want to get better. Help somebody get better. Enterprise architecture is good advice. What change is required to reach your strategy? What's the most effective change? What's the most possible change? What is the least risky change? Those are all the criteria that you'll use to guide change, but that's your purpose as an enterprise architect and enterprise architecture team. I talked earlier about the 4 common use cases. Why does an architecture team exist? Support strategy. If you are supporting strategy, what you will be doing is defining change initiatives and portfolios. If you are not involved in that, you are not supporting strategy. Support portfolio, managing a portfolio of change. What are you going to be involved in? Driving projects. What are the definitions of projects? What's the synergy of projects? What's the sequencing of projects? What's the sequencing of change? If you're not involved in that, you're not supporting portfolio. If you are, you're in front of decision. You're not chasing the decision. Supporting project, boundary of the project, alignment. How does this project fit? What are the synergies in the project? What is the things that are in it? How do the constraints you're going to pass down to a solution? Last one, supporting solution. How's the change going to be done? There's a lot of other use cases for enterprise architecture. IT modernization, digital transformation. They're normally going to fit within one of these. And if you want to know where the sweet spot is, where the most successful architecture teams are, supporting portfolio. Helping an organization guide a portfolio of change. That is the most common success model with the lowest reboot rate. The highest reboot rate, supporting solution. Because the architects show up after the decisions are made and argue. And if you're showing up after the decisions have been made, you are not guiding effective change, you are interfering with effective change, which leads you to be rebooted because you're a barrier to success. And when I've been a VP and driven an organization, I know what I do to barriers to change. I use a bulldozer, push them off the path, and move on because I'm in a hurry and I want to know what to do that's right. This then comes back to architecture governance. The governance section that's in the Leader's Guide says there's 2 things you need to govern. First is the creation of your architecture. Does your architecture actually represent the change the company wants to do? Did your stakeholders approve your architecture? That's pretty blunt. It says if your stakeholders didn't approve your architecture, you don't have an architecture, you have an opinion. And what is the difference between your opinion and a portfolio leader's opinion? One of you has power and a budget, and the other has an opinion. Guide somebody who's driving change. What will your org look like? What are the approved changes? Once you've got your architecture, now what are you governing? Execution. Fundamentals of governance, you're giving somebody a performance expectation. You're saying, go do this change and follow these constraints. Constraints, architecture specifications. What are the rules of the change? You will use the open footprint data model, full stop. Don't talk about it, moving on. It's not an argument because that's what we're doing because that's efficiency for us. And then you'll be controls, what reporting back. Were the directions followed? Were the constraints adhered to? And if they weren't, what are you doing to fix that? Because those constraints exist for a reason. In this country, we all drive on the wrong side of the road. In my country, we all drive on the right side of the road. Arbitrary rule. Both work. I can drive here, I can drive in Canada. I can't drive on the wrong side of the road here, because I'm not conforming to traffic. I'm not following it. And there's a control. Often there's multiple sets of controls for that. Now, customizing, configuring. What is it that you're going to customize and configure? Leader's Guide says it's really, really, really clear. You're going to customize your deliverable documents and your information. That's it. Are you going to customize the ADM? No. Because the ADM is an information model, and if you don't have the information necessary to succeed, you're going to fail, guaranteed. It's all about knowledge. It's all about creating and engineering knowledge. The process that you go through, you're going to customize, and you're going to have to engage with business processes. And those business processes depend on where you are. But the critical customization is what information do you capture and how do you deliver it? If you want a really cool example, TOGAF says that you come out of Phase A with an architecture vision document. If you ever work at the Government of Canada on transformative change, you're going to see a really cool thing called a cabinet briefing document. Cabinet briefing documents were first done in 1868 and essentially are unchanged, and they look like an architecture vision. What are the parameters of change? What are we trying to achieve? What are the goals? What are the constraints? And it is a document that then Cabinet says, yeah, we'll fund. What's the purpose of architecture vision? Your stakeholders going, yeah, we'll fund. Then you get down to Phase E, G, EF, and you're building a roadmap and a plan. What are they doing there? Your stakeholders are moving past, yeah, we'll fund, to you, go do. Fit in. Those processes are immutable. Now, the processes are tied to your org model, and I routinely run into things. Oh, if we didn't work for the CIO, if we only worked for this guy, it's all crap. It doesn't matter where you work for. It doesn't matter who your boss is. It matters who you serve. And are you successfully serving that individual? I've got architecture teams we've worked with for decades who are misaligned in terms of organization and successfully doing it because they serve the right people. You don't have to work for the right person. It makes it a little easier. Sometimes you don't have as much conflict with your boss. But what do you need to do? Organize for what your purpose is. Organize your team for your work product. Organize for how you manage and who's on your team. An architecture team, it talks in the book about building a team or building a capability, and it very deliberately is structured to be the leader's guide. The leader being the person who leads the capability, not the boss or chief architect, because you're trying to accomplish that. And you got enterprise processes. I mentioned those a few times that you're going to have to connect to. Your company has existing processes for planning and execution. Do you plug into them? Or do you show up late? Plug in. It's a lot more fun. Decision-making processes, execution, strategy development, governance processes. Really common if you're working in portfolio, you have to tie into the budget process. Think about when your budgets are decided. If you're working on a calendar basis, it's probably sometime in October. What does that tell you as an architect? When do you need to show up? It's May. You need to feed into that process, not the end of it, because you're providing effective guidance. And all of this, all of our organizations want to change. All of our organizations want to be better. Whether we're incrementally improving, whether we are radically transforming, it doesn't really matter. We want to be better, and our leaders want good advice. I have never met a successful senior leader who wasn't open to good advice about how to drive a change that was more effective. So everything you need to do, if you're building your architecture team, build a capability model. Build yourself out. Identify what capability, what ability, what people, what processes, what information do you need to succeed. All of that, 110 pages. It's all in there, remember. Start at chapter 4, then jump to chapter 5. Line up to what your business wants, and you'll have phenomenal success. And then we're over to Chris, who's going to talk about... Okay.
Thanks for that for Dave. And actually, I just wanted to do a few housekeeping things, which I sort of forgot at the start. What we are going to do is to have a Q&A panel at the end. But there is a way, if this thing was to click on in a minute, to take questions remotely. So if you don't want to ask your question, but you want to feed it in to the system, you can go to slido.com, key in the hashtag OGLON, and then select TOGAF User Group meeting. So you can actually submit questions that way electronically if you don't want to ask them in the session later, or if you're remotely. We are actually, I should have said, we are being joined on it. We are doing a live stream from here out onto LinkedIn, I believe, at the moment. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker now. It's Chris Frost, who's Principal Enterprise Architect at Fujitsu Global Services Business Group. So Chris is going to be talking about enabling enterprise agility, which is one of our specific new TOGAF Series Guides. So over to you, Chris.
So, thank you very much, Andrew. Just give me a moment here while I do the obligatory laptop and projector dance. I don't know if that's Dave's.
That is for the clicker if you want it.
No, it's okay, I'm good. But I do need that, because this has got DisplayPort. Okay, good. So, yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Dave. As Andrew said, my name's Chris Frost, and I'm with Fujitsu Services. I'm a Principal Enterprise Architect. But of relevance to what we're talking about here this morning, I'm also the lead author for what was called the Enabling Enterprise Agility Guide. So what I'm going to tell you in the next 20-25 minutes or so is essentially what's in that box, what's in that guide, and how to use it. So here it is. First up, TOGAF Series Guide goes under the snappily titled code of G20F. I mentioned that because that's actually the quickest way if you look trying to find it in the library. Because if you just put that code G20F in the search of the library, that's probably the quickest way to actually find this guide. And it's called Enabling Enterprise Agility. And if I wanted to just put in one sentence, what's this all about? It's describing how to apply the TOGAF standard when you're working in an agile enterprise. And I guess, at least I would hope, that's a situation that applies probably to a lot of you here today. So I'm just going to do a quick tour of what's in this. So chapter 1 of the guide, there's 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is just a short introduction. Chapter 2 gives you some definitions, useful things, but then it's in chapter 3 where we start to get into the sort of real meat of it. Chapter 3 is talking about the architecture development method, the ADM, and just giving a brief introduction to how does that fit into agile projects. Chapter 4 essentially starts to go into that in a little bit more detail. What are the various techniques, guidance for how you use the ADM in agile projects? And then chapter 5 which is called Enterprise Architecture in an Agile Environment, is sort of taking a reverse point of view, sort of looking at the kinds of things that you commonly find in Agile frameworks, so things like the SAFEs and the LESS and all of these frameworks, some of the things that you commonly find in those frameworks, and how do they fit in with TOGAF? So it's sort of taking almost like the reverse point of view. So I'll just take a bit of a canter through those chapters. I obviously won't go through the introduction and the definitions. That's just something to read there if you need it. But chapter 3, which is just introducing the ADM and how does that fit into an agile delivery environment. I guess the one key point that this is making is that the TOGAF framework is not a waterfall thing. You know, it's still something I hear quite a lot. TOGAF ADM is waterfall, and sort of people cite the fact that you've got the ADM that sort of talks about phase A, phase B, phase C, and so on. And well, that's obviously waterfall, isn't it? No, not at all. Yet the order of the starts and finishes matter, of course. So you have to start phase A before you can go into B, before you can go into C, and so on. And the order of the finishes matter, in that you sort of finish A before you can say you finish B, and before you finish C. And that's kind of just an inevitable logical flow, because if you think about it, how could I possibly be telling you that I've finished my technology architecture when actually somebody's still working on the business architecture? Obviously that doesn't make sense. And the flip side of that, how could I confidently say, yeah, I'm starting work on the application architecture when actually I haven't really finished working I haven't even started working on the vision, so I haven't even really established the scope of what I'm doing. So there's a certain inevitability to the fact that I have to start things in this order, and that I have to finish them in that order. But of course, within that, things can overlap and iterate between the different phases, and in reality they usually do, because even before the sort of term of agile working became popular, in reality, as a practicing architect, did you ever completely work through your business architecture start to finish uninterrupted, do the whole thing, finish it, and then never come back to it again while you then worked on the application architecture? In reality, you probably always did overlap these things a little bit. It's just that now, that's just a little bit more explicit, and indeed positively encouraged to do this sort of iterative development. Chapter 4 is then sort of looking at some of this stuff in a little bit more detail. And there'll be some very familiar messages in there if you are familiar with agile working. So it talks about things like doing the architecture iteratively. And again, really, if you think about it, it's just common sense stuff, isn't it? It's talking about doing a little bit of work, doing your testing, your validation, however that might be, stakeholder reviews, and then going on to the next steps based on that feedback. It's talking about doing a little bit of architecture up front, necessarily, if you like, the intentional architecture, as it's called in most of the frameworks, before you sort of get into any of the construction, because there are some, there are almost always some aspects of groundwork, some sort of setting of foundations that you need to do before you can meaningfully start any construction. So do a little bit of the architecture up front, but get to that first capability level, as it's described in TOGAF, that lowest level of architecture, the one that you then actually turn into implementable designs. Get to that as soon as possible, so that you can get as soon as possible then into actually starting to construct the solution, getting something running. Then you can start to gather live feedback from the use of whatever it is you're building, and then feed that back into the later cycles. So do a little bit up front, the intentional architecture, but get to the point as soon as possible that you're actually starting to build some parts of the running solution. Another point it touches on is governance, and from practical experience, this, for me, is one of the things that is quite a significant change in agile working, because previously, and again certainly from my own experience, governance is something we tended to do in sort of big stage gate review types of things. You'd maybe have some major stage end review at the end of a design phase or something like that, where you do some big review exercise, days of work, possibly even more, as you went through documents and sort of marked up homework and possibly sent things back for rework. But it all happened in that sort of stage end phase. Here we're talking about doing things much more continuously, working as governance architects or as governance reviewers with the teams doing the development work. So it becomes much more of a sort of a consultative and advisory type of engagement rather than a policing type of engagement. Don't be that policeman that just sort of turns up once every 3 or 4 months and sort of goes, oh, no, go and redo this bit. Be the helpful advisor who turns up, perhaps every week, and says, I see what you're doing there, but a really successful way we did that over here was perhaps a little bit different, and have you considered maybe that? Or that's good, but I still can't see where you're covering, this part of the requirement. So, I think it's probably a good idea to go and have a closer look at that part of your work. So, much more sort of consultative and advisory type of approach, rather than the policeman, like I said, turning up every 3 months or whatever it might be. And as you're creating your architecture, you've always got to be thinking about this continuous delivery aspect, because again, one of the fundamental mantras of agile working is this notion of continuous delivery, delivering in small increments of work. And that just won't happen by magic. That has to be sort of deliberately and intentionally done. So as an architect, you may be thinking of, how do I organize my tool chain and my operational systems to allow me to do those incremental batches of work and put them, right from the beginning of the architecture work all the way through the various processes until it eventually ends up in the running system. So, think about how that whole development and operational system will work so that you can do these little bits of incremental delivery. And then, of course, the operational system itself, the running system itself, that too you want to be agile and responsive. And so that will mean things like if you're wanting to enable these small rapid releases, that's great. But of course, sometimes releases go wrong, don't they? Sometimes you need to back things out. And especially if you're doing a high release cadence and you want to sort of have the minimum barriers possible to having these rapid incremental releases, you also need to have pretty efficient mechanisms in order to back it out when it goes wrong, because things will go wrong. Even when you've got the best experts in the world working on things, things still sometimes go wrong. So that can often come down to just simple things like having software switches through your system so that you can turn bits of it on and off again, and thinking about planning in advance how you would roll back a change if it went wrong and that kind of thing. So these are all the things to think about when you're wanting to create that architecture for continuous delivery. And then another thing that's in this chapter might seem a little odd, because this is a guide about working in an agile way, but of course, as we know, that is not the only way. Yes, it's the way that this guide talks about, but occasionally, for example, it is appropriate to work in a more waterfall style, for example. If you're working in highly regulated, safety-critical environments where very comprehensive design reviews have to be done for some regulator requirement, then you will have to take a more of a waterfall approach to create all of those specifications or whatever it might be in order to fit into that environment. And as an architect, if you're the architect leading the work, then you need to think about actually, yes, what is the appropriate delivery style? And sometimes at the other end of the scale, you may be working in an environment where you've got to do something, extremely quickly. It's almost like a one-shot process through. We have to get something completed in a very short period of time. And so you might take a very sort of rapid approach, as it's called. So actually in the chapter, it looks at the 3 different possible delivery styles, which it calls the rapid, the agile, and the robust. And actually the author of that section is actually sitting right here at the front, Mike Annis. So I can defer any questions on that part of it to Mike here. So thanks for Mike for that particular section. And then moving on to chapter 5. Like I said, this is the one where it starts to take sort of almost the reverse point of view and say, okay, so some of the things that's commonly talked about in agile frameworks, how does this fit in with TOGAF? So it sort of looks a little bit about the project to product shift, and what does that mean in terms of an architect working with TOGAF, that now you're taking a more sort of whole product view of what you're working on rather than a project view. It talks a little bit about how techniques like design thinking fit in. Design thinking is actually covered in many places within TOGAF and indeed other open group standards. But here it's talking about how, for example, would that fit into TOGAF. It talks about using things like the business model canvas, because a lot of agile approaches use something very similar to this as a good way to get that initial overview of, okay, at a very high level, just what are my business objectives here? What is my cost structure, my revenue structure? What is my value proposition here? All of those early visioning and scoping type of things that you need to do. And that can be a very good approach for doing that. And it talks a little bit about the need for using agile artifacts, often meaning things like templates, because these things set a tone. If it makes me smile sometimes, perhaps smile is the wrong thing, but if we're asking our architects to work in agile ways, but then the next thing we do is give them a 100-page template to fill in, that's a bit of a conflict, isn't it? It's quite hard to work in a rapid, iterative sort of way at the same time as asking somebody to fill out a 100-page template. So if it's your job to be defining templates, then think about how you could make them a little bit shorter, a little bit more minimalistic to encourage that sort of iterative working. So that's taken a quick sort of canter through the major contents of the guide and some of the things that are in it. Now, if you're thinking about agile architecture and how I do that, then of course there's the guide I've just described, the Enabling Enterprise Agility Guide. I don't know if we've got any copies of that down here, but certainly I've seen some downstairs. Some downstairs. But the good news is, from the open group, there's also a number of other things that I would encourage you to look at as well. If you're an architect working in agile ways, there's another guide, happens to be G210, again, that document code, good way to actually find them in the open group library, applying the TOGAF ADM in agile sprints. And what that guide does is it kind of zooms into the very particular part of the problem of how do I adapt the ADM to fit into the sort of typical 2-week or so sprint cycles that common methods like Scrum, for example, talk about. So, it really sort of zooms into that part of the problem, which the Enabling Enterprise Agility Guide also looks at, but takes a sort of view on some of the other aspects as well that I've been describing. And then Also, I'd encourage you to look at the Open Agile Architecture work, known as the OAA to its friends. That's another product of the Architecture Forum, which of course is a forum in the Open Group that owns TOGAF. It covers, oh yes, and I should give a shout out to the chair of the OAA work over there. Steve Nicol over there. So I'd encourage you to look at that too. That gives a whole collection of tools and techniques and guidance and building blocks, as they're called in the OAA, for helping you with agile working. And some of the same techniques, for example, I think the OAA also covers a little bit on design thinking, if I'm not mistaken. So again, another source of advice and guidance on agile working. So to wrap up and summarize, I would honestly say that enterprise architecture is improved by using agile delivery frameworks and vice versa. And the main reason I say that is not some sort of religious doctrine. It's that by adopting that iterative, do a little bit of work, test it, is it good, carry on, is there a problem, adjust, move forward again, and possibly even if it's appropriate, completely pivot, going a different direction. Taking that approach is, I think, in most cases, genuinely beneficial to that, shall we say, the older waterfall approach where, you had very rare opportunities through the life cycle to actually take the opportunity to pause, check, am I on the right path? And sadly, some of the project failures that some of the older people in the audience may have seen through their careers, we maybe realised just a little bit too late that we were on the wrong path. So the sooner you can do that and correct, the better. And I say vice versa as well, because if you're working on some of the larger problems in developing systems or developing digital solutions, then there are a lot of problems that you can solve in these emergent ways, and you'll hear people saying things like, the best architectures spontaneously emerge from the development teams, and yes, that's true to a point. But I would honestly say, when you're working on the real, on the larger scale projects, then if there isn't some that intentional architecture up front, laying down some of the foundations, some of the principles, some of the guardrails, these types of things, then it's very easy for a purely emergent architecture to sadly start to go off in a slightly strange direction. And if you want an illustration of that, just think of natural human evolution. That's essentially been an emergent process. And mostly, it's quite a good biological machine, isn't it? It works. But then there are some slightly crazy things, like, where we breathe through and where we eat through is crazily mixed up. I mean, who thought, if you were designing that, who thought that was a good idea? The tube that you put your food through is also the same as the tube that you breathe through, because there's some obvious problems with that, isn't there, if you think about that from a sensible design point of view. But hey, that's emergent architecture. Mostly good, but you can find yourself kind of developing in a wrong direction. So, EA is improved by using agile delivery frameworks and vice versa. It does mean some changed ways of working if you've not done this before. Now, I should think, talking about this now, most of us will have experienced this. So we'll be familiar with the fact that, yes, it does mean a change to the ways of working with the incremental development and the continuous governance. But, there's nothing really so hard about that. There's nothing so fundamentally difficult about that. It is an adjustment that, if you've not already made it, I'm sure we can all do it. And finally, I would say, and I hope I've made the point clear on the previous slide, there is a lot of help available from the Open Group. There's the Enabling Enterprise Agility Guide, the Sprinting the ADM Guide, the OA material. There's, excuse me, there's a lot of really good material there that's available from the Open Group to help you as architects work out what you need to do working in an agile delivery environment. So, thank you very much. That's a brief canter through the guide, and I encourage you to go and take a look at it. Thank you.
Next up is Dave again. And Dave's going to tell us about the ADM Practitioner's Guide. So it's another guide that Dave has led the team working on. You've got my dongle at the moment.
Your dongle? Oh, I left my dongle.
Too many dongles. This is just going to go in that also, thanks.
So that the laser thing works?
Yeah. That's easy. Okay, and we're going to flip it over here again, aren't we?
So, this is about the Practitioner's Guide. And one of the things I want to highlight when we're thinking about the guides is if you flip to about here, there's a section on how to do Agile. It goes on for an outstanding 2 paragraphs and says it's really, really important to get it right. Or you can get Chris's guide, which goes on into a little bit more detail. One of the design characteristics of TOGAF and the guides is to allow us to do that. I have a generalist guide on how to do enterprise architecture, how to do it to support the 4 basic patterns: strategy, portfolio, practitioner. We then have more advanced guidance on very specific use cases. There's the 7 guides around business architecture. Here, it says business architecture is really important, do it right. So what we're talking about here in the Practitioner's Guide is the transitioning to delivery, developing and delivering an architecture that guides change, putting the ADM in practice, and inventing, creating knowledge that can be used to guide and constrain change, what the architecture landscape is, and what to find in a good architecture repository. So in practice, Chris talked about the ADM being an incremental approach with some logical constraints. What you're doing when you're architecting is you are creating knowledge. You are creating an understanding of what your world looks like today, what your world, where it fails. Practitioner's Guide talks about deficiencies. Your organization isn't happy. It has a shortfall in agility, a shortfall in capability, a shortfall in something. Your target addresses that shortfall. What does it take to make that target change? That's knowledge. What is the best place to address that change? How are you moving forward? Because what you need to know is exactly where your enterprise fails. Where does it fall short? That's the fix. If you're not focused on where the shortfall is, you're not focused on something that's particularly useful. And that's the core piece in developing the ADM. What is it that will make your stakeholders happier? What is it that will allow your organization to meet its objectives and goals and strategy? What work will close the gap? And that's when you look at the structure of the ADM and you think about governance. Phase A, Phase B, Phase C, Phase D are all about figuring out what is the work that will fill the deficiency. Phase E and F are all about agreeing to do the work. Without an agreement to execute, you don't have a change that's going to happen. And you're not going to get a well thought out guided change without understanding what the deficiency is and what needs to fill it. Is it software development? Is it organizational redesign? Is it standing up an architecture, an agile team? Depending on where you're working in enterprise architecture, you may be doing very different things, and that's one of the important things that's in practitioners, is highlight who you are serving and the questions you are answering may be very, very different. All of this is about creating knowledge. Knowledge engineering, creation of knowledge, and the irony is, in the practitioner's guide, deliberately, you do not get a copy of the crop circle ADM. It wasn't put in. We left it out. In fact, when you go through this, what you're going to discover flipping through this one guide has not one fundamental diagram in it. Because it's talking about how to put those into practice, how to take those fundamental constructs and execute them. Instead, we did something actually radical. We put a project plan in, a Gantt chart on how to develop an ADM for strategy. And what you'll see is exactly what Chris said. You don't go A, then B, then C, then D. If you are creating the knowledge of your business architecture, you are executing phase B. You're probably going to start developing your business architecture simultaneously with your application architecture, simultaneously with your technology architecture, simultaneously with your roadmap. Why? Because they all play together. That's what iteration is in practice. It's not going from A and bouncing back to B. It's having your business architect actually talk to application. A few years ago, there was this really cool thing invented. ATMs, the little things in the wall, hole in the wall. Do you think a single bank thought that was a good idea and said, business architecture, we're going to completely change retail banking. Yep, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to go and ask for some technology to be invented? Or do you think some jerk showed up with the concept of an ATM and radically rechanged banking? It was the latter. You don't get to do technology and application architecture after you've made your business decisions, because the technology capabilities, the application capabilities change what you can do in your business architecture. That's how you do it in practice. You tie them together so that you can move forward. Here's a couple of plans. Architecture for project. Architecture for portfolio. What are the big steps of work you're going to do if you're working in architecture for project? Well, one of the things are you have to accept the fact that your portfolio, your big change, have already been decided. No one's asking you to invent the change portfolio, the portfolio of change there. Flip side is, if you're working in portfolio, you're going to be worrying about viability and opportunity, not so much about execution. The questions you ask are very different. The ADM you use is identical. Who you're serving and the questions you're asking are the differences. So think about those plans for whom you are serving. That's what the big section that's in here, there's a whole giant section. There's the Gantt chart. Walking through, and that was highlighted to what does it mean for ADM and execution that you've got these start and finish dependencies, because you can only create your knowledge by tying it together. Don't think of the ADM as a waterfall work plan. Your architecture landscape. simplification of reality. Breadth, time, level of detail. When you are working as an architect to deliver an architecture, you're not architecting the entire enterprise top to bottom across all domains, across all scopes of time. Someone is asking you to address a problem, to address a deficiency. You're going to be constrained conceivably by superior architecture, architecture that's already been decided. We are a retail bank. That's already been decided. What's your focus? I'll stop banging that, I promise. You build formal models. How much work do you do? Enough for confidence for the question that you're being asked. Chris's guide, G20F, and by the way, he is right, that is the fastest way to find it, says, don't do big, giant upfront architecture. Practitioner's guide tells you the same thing. Do enough to guide the change for the question you're asking. And that may be, I'm feeding a constraint into my Agile project. You will use this data model. Don't care how you develop it, don't care about your UI, don't care about a long list of things. Why am I caring about the data thing? Because I know this app needs to integrate with this one. I need you to do the equivalent of drive on the right side of the road. Because it would be a lot more convenient if we let every Agile team, every driver in the UK decide speed limit, width of vehicle, and what side of the road to drive on. That's what a lot of bottom-up software emergent architecture delivers. Then you spend a thing called, you develop technical debt. If it matters to you in your architecture, put a spec in. And build appropriate models. You're going to have many, many models. Chris showed an example of the value business model canvas. Using a business model canvas is a model kind. It tells you things. I use business model canvases all the time, not at a product level. I use them at an enterprise level because all of those resources that you need on the left, oh my God, it's just a walking capability model right there. What is it that I need? Who are my resources? Who are my partners? It's all on the left. One model won't show you why your enterprise isn't agile. One model won't show you how you have to protect your data. One model won't show you all of your application integration. And one model won't show you your supply chain weaknesses. If those are your problems, you're going to have to put different models together to find the gap. You're going to have to create the knowledge as you work your way through. Which gets to your hard bit. Working with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders own the architecture. The technical thing on governance in here is dead clear. It says your stakeholders own all decisions about the architecture. It also says your implementers own all decisions about implementation. By inference, what does an enterprise architect own in terms of decision? Nothing. It's not a decision-making job, it's an advisory job. Your stakeholders own the architecture. What do you have to do then? Work with them so that they can understand the trade-off. Do they understand the implications of their choice, wherever their choice is? And when an implementer makes a choice, do your stakeholders understand the implications of that choice? If it is not following the architecture, what is it that you do? All through this, eye on the prize. Fundamental nature of enterprise architecture is getting it done so that you can actually help your company do the valuable bit, which is change. My practice, we have a joke, time to latte. Because you know an architect has delivered value when they can sit at a cafe and sip a latte. Because the longer they spend architecting, the bigger the delays they're putting in in the organization executing the change. Architecture is about creating the knowledge to guide effective change. Value is created in TOGAF's Phase G when the change is executed. And value is only realized after the change is successful. So if you're an architect, time to latte. Guide effective change. What needs to be fixed? What's the fix? What is the work that your organization will fund and pay for? General guide. In the guidance, as Chris said, there's lots of other material that's available. Specific guidance around business architecture capabilities, specific guidance around working in an agile framework, G210F and G220F. Specific guidance, as Celine's going to talk about, doing things around sustainability. The reason for all that specific guidance, all of us have different companies and different problems. And we use a common framework. The fundamentals don't change. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave mentioned, Celine is up next. Celine's just coming to join us. For those who don't know Celine is a lead architect at AXA. I guess you'll tell us a little bit more, won't you, Celine? Do you need any of these dongles? Or?
I think HDMI.
You want the HDMI, yeah. Okay. Get you set up here.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah.
There you go.
It works that one that way.
There's a laser.
Yes, hello. So I'm a woman and I am a French person, so sorry for my sorry for my English. Maybe to start, I would like to know who is a member of the Architecture Forum and who is not in the room. So a few ones raise their hand. Yeah, quite a lot. Okay. No, because I'm going to speak about a guide that is under company review. So if you want to take part to the review of that guide, if you are a member of the open group, you can do so. And if you are not yet a member, maybe you can become one with your company. So maybe you have noticed that the topic of the forum is enterprise architecture for sustainability. And this is a proposal of a TOGAF Series Guide to provide some guidance to enterprise architects to address the digital sustainability topic. So it's very focused on digital sustainability, how technologies, IT can really support a sustainable world and how we should proceed to reach that objective. Yes, a few words about myself. I've been taking part to this event in the open group, first as a representative of Harris Moore, who used to be the French office of the open group. So I've met Andrew, for instance, quite a while. I remember a lot of time ago when I first came in this place to attend the meeting. I've been a TOGAF trainer also, and at the moment I'm an enterprise architect in an insurance company, which is AXA. So I take part to the enterprise architecture governance, and I'm also leading for AXA the digital sustainability program. Maybe a few words about myself also. In 2018, so there have been different studies that have been published in France and also in the world about the carbon footprint and ICT carbon footprint. And when I have understood that, I have thought it was very important to leverage what I knew, enterprise architecture, which is a systemic transformation approach to address that. So what we try to do with that guide is, if we consider our skills as enterprise architects, how can we use them to address that topic? So it was really what we tried to do. It is a result not of, so I'm representing today, but I'm not the single one who have worked on that. There has been several companies involved, I would say the railway, SNCF company, so AXA, of course, people of Société Générale, people from Thales in France have also contributed, and we were able to leverage some of the enterprise architect community we have in France to do that. So it's a result of a collective work that was done in the context of a French NGO, the SHIFT project that is dedicated to low carbon economy, and that is now transmitted to the Open Group for a more international benefit. I'm doing a call for participation because, I didn't say it yet, but I am co-chair of the Architecture Forum, and I have a passion in life. It is writing papers to fit international standards, and we'd be very happy to have many other people who have that same passion, because I think we can have more. Definitely, to read the paper that are proposed, to propose some paper. And in my architecture practice, this is something that has bred me as architect, because it is a way to step back. And stepping back when we are engaged in organization with short-term requests is something that you don't do in a natural manner. So coming back to the Open Group, writing paper is a way for me, like teaching, like presenting today, to step back, which is a fundamental value, I think, in my enterprise architecture practice. So Daniel, who is over there, sent the company review request for this guide. And this guide is not finished, so it is a kind of preview also to give you a flavor of what is in, and to encourage you to take part to the review, because the more people take part to the review, the more universal the content becomes. And also, if you take part to the review, this guide becomes a little bit yours. So it's changing your relationship with it. And you will have a different attitude when it will come on the market, and maybe like a book that Andrew may distribute, well, if this happens. So I told you, you have here the summary, because I think it's very important to keep the lineage of knowledge, where things are born. So I told you, this started with a SHIFT project delivery. So you can find some documentation there. It's available in English, and it's free, so it's very easy to access. So in September 2022, we have delivered the first version of this guide. It was presented at Edinburgh APC, because we were started the Architecture Forum review. So we had some review. So I want to give a special thanks to Lars Russen, Linda Tate, Chris Ford, and Robert Weissman, who made some feedback on that. Since then, we had the editor review with your team. And now we are starting the company review, and it will last until end of May. So it's plenty of time to make some feedback. So I'm presenting here the table of content, because I think it's important for you to get the global idea of what is there. It's starting with an introduction on the environmental impact of ICT, because it's something, I don't know about you, but in France it's something that was not very much taught at university or in engineer school. So it's something on which we have to work. So there are many tools that now exist in France, and the guide is proposing a review on that. I will have a short slide about it after, but this is the main topic I spoke in Edinburgh. Then we have a chapter that is expliciting the relationship to existing standards of the Open Group, because the idea is to make things consistent. Then we describe the capability, so the purpose of the digital sustainability capability, and how to deploy a sustainable information system policy. So we will go through that. And then what we propose is a reference model, so a business function reference model, where you have the description of the different activities you need to have in an organization that would like to move toward a sustainable information system that is compatible with the different environmental challenge we have at the moment. So I'm going to deep dive on that. So then you have, we try to provide high-level representation, as you can see here, and detailed level representation, and also some comments on each box. So the idea of the framework is to provide different level of representation, and of course, each organization, like anything in TOGAF, needs to customize it. It is a guidance, leveraging best practice that I am personally applying that have been developed in the AXA context. So it's also concrete experience, but also from other organizations. So all is not true for all organizations, and you have to find, and maybe you will have to add some elements for your specific organization to compare to that. We are finished with a last chapter. So for those who have attended the beginning of the week, there have been many discussions about how to measure environmental impact, and clearly to drive enterprise architecture in the right direction. So there is the open footprint standard that is also developed in the open group, but we will need much more standards about how to measure environmental impact and guidance for that. So we describe in this chapter also what we think we need in that domain. So Dave knows that, maybe Paul also. I have a kind of working on sustainability makes dynamic system. Maybe some of you know about dynamic system, and if yes, I'm interested to be connected with you. But system dynamics is very important when you think about sustainability. And here it is a diagram that is kind of representing where the pollutions come from. So I have put it in a red square on the right side. And the fact that you have different causal effects. So the more usage you have, the more infrastructure you need, and the more infrastructure you need, the more usage you will develop. So this creates kind of positive feedback loops that makes the current IT sector generating a lot of equipment, consuming a lot of electricity. That leads to a kind of pollution. Normally, when this happens, you have a balancing feedback loop that you see at the bottom with the cost, because when you have more infrastructure, the cost is increasing. But in the case of IT, cost efficiency has increased a lot, so the cost has not increased, which explains why we could develop a lot of digital without exploding the cost of the capability. And this produces something that is a little bit counterintuitive. You may think that optimization is something that is good for sustainability, but optimization alone is not good, because you have a rebound effect, like you can see on this diagram, and the volumes keeps on increasing. So you need to define some rules to keep the volume under control, so that your global pollution impact or energy impact is put under control. So I could spend hours on that diagram. It's a causal loop diagram inspired from system dynamics, and its main strength is to show causal link and also reinforcing feedback loop or balancing one, which are the one whom we have to play in system dynamics. So you have here the reference. I want to tell you also that OECD is proposing also some method around that. I think it's very interesting to see that OECD is developing that. And it's important also to understand rebound effect. Yeah. So why does it make sense for enterprise architecture? Enterprise architecture is a systemic transformation approach for the organization, so it makes perfectly sense to dedicate it for that. So among the different, so when you will go through the guide, you will see different artifacts. We have a first one that is representing the information system lifecycle management, and what is a bit different compared to what we do usually is that it is looking at the full supply chain from the extract of raw material and natural resources until the waste. So you have to consider the full life cycle of your IT equipments when you think of digital sustainability. And in that life cycle, in the middle of it, you have to build machines. So this is usually what, I don't know, HP, Dell is doing, well, big providers. And then you are building an information system, so you are connecting them together to deliver some services. And then you have, so this is where usually us as architects, we work. And then you have to use and maintain it. And at the end, like for the data, because well, I've worked a lot on data, you have to think on how you are going to manage the waste or the recycle. What is very important also in that ecosystem is that there are the manufacturer, how they were trained, what are the skills they have, and us as well as IS professionals, what is our knowledge background and what are our practice. And at the top of it, you have other actors that are in the ecosystem, very important, the ones that regulate the sector, so here it's the government. I would put more or less the open group in that area. It's not a regulator, but proposing standard is a way also to regulate, well, to regulate the worldwide ecosystem. And then you have NGO and also, I would say, educational system with universities that share the knowledge on that is very important. So it's, at the moment, we observe a kind of burst in that area in France. I don't know about other countries, but really it's significantly improving. So it's to explain that. Then you have the reference model that we have proposed. We try to take care to use also Archimate, so it is Archimate business function that we represent there, and also a global capability to deploy a sustainable information system policy. And the reference model is organized like that. At the top, you have first, and I think you know that perfectly as enterprise architect, but you need a sponsor in your organization. You need the top management to ask you for the transformation, and if not, you are just preparing your land, but you are not executing the transformation. So it's very important to get the sponsorship, especially on the sustainability topic. That is a new topic that many organizations try to find their way on that, and we need to invent the path because we don't know yet exactly where we need to go. So the sponsorship is something very important. At the bottom, you can see the governance. That is the operational, I would say, day-to-day check that the strategy is well executed. And in the case of digital sustainability, you can have a specific CSR, so corporate and social responsibility governance, but the approach that I have followed and that I see followed is more to add the sustainability criteria in existing governance rather than to add a new governance, because we already have a lot in our organization. And at the end, the point is to have the sustainability criteria embedded in any decision that is made. So the idea is more to leverage the existing governance and to use them. And by the way, it's working quite well. It's also quite funny, you know. Sometimes you may have internal control or audits coming on the topic. Sometimes, well, it's very useful, but everybody is not totally happy to do that. But on digital, on sustainability topic, people find a lot of sense at doing audits or internal control on that. And there is kind of synergy that is created in the organization and new interest for all different mechanisms to address that. So I think it's very motivating, and it's generating really good work. So that's at the bottom. At the kernel, you have the design and build a sustainable information system. Here it is about how we manage data, how we develop, how we do data science, how we do architecture. We have, so I am working in this sector since 1996, so it's quite a while now. And I think since the beginning of my career, IT is cheaper and cheaper. And each time I say, oh, guys, you have to take care of your data volumes, they just answer me, but yes, but selling the data storage is costing nothing now. So I'm fed up with your control. I don't want to do it anymore. And there is a major change we have to do in your organization. We had this winter an energy crisis in Europe, so we were fearing in France to have shortage in terms of electricity. It's the first time I live it since I am born. Hopefully the weather has been nice and we managed to get enough gas and so on, but I think it's a huge warning. We have developed IT in an environment where energy was really abundant, and we have to consider that this is going to change. So the energy cost of the solution we deploy is going to be instrumental to secure our digital, because if there is no more electricity, there is no more IT. We had to work on zero IT plan to see how we can operate in France if we have no more electricity. And I think it's a kind of paradigm change for IT professionals. So, and we need really to think of that. So it will mean training people, it will mean changing the practice. So this is what is in building. Of course, in operating, we will have to repair a lot more the equipment. Culture is about the training, how we do innovation and so on. And so this is what you have at the middle, which is very important, because if you don't understand that we have a problem with the environment, you don't understand why you should change your IT practice. On the right-hand side, we have put the measure. So there has been a lot of conference on that. We can speak 3 hours, 2 days about the measure of ICT environmental impact. I'm not doing it now, but this is very important. And like requirement is in the kernel of TOGAF, the measure of CO2 electricity consumption is at the kernel of any decision around sustainability. So it's very aligned, I think, with our value, but it is science-based approach. And we have to check that the decisions that are made provide quantitative results, because there is a kind of emergency also to act efficiency on that. And then there is what I do today. It is the ecosystem. We all work with a lot of providers. They are making progress on that. Probably they still have to do some. And also we need to put in common, so this is the idea with sharing with the open group, the best practices so that we can be fast in their deployment in the world. So in the guide, we do also a mapping with the ADM, which is quite natural. I'm not going to detail it now because I think I'm almost at the end. Here you have also some guidance about the measure, what you should measure, and a few steps proposed to go there and to do it. And we also worked on, when we work with providers, what are the data we need from them. So, of course, you need totals, how much CO2, for instance, when you use, I don't know, SaaS services from a provider or any cloud provider, you will need data, so you need the total, how much CO2 this is emitting, but you will need also electricity consumption, and you will need to have more detailed data to understand what are the pieces of the different service you use that are producing that, because if you want to act on that, you need to know to have more details. So this is also a proposal of what we would need and in terms of measure. Since we are a lot of architects, we have tried to make a digital sustainability principle, so you can have a look at it, but it's in the spirit of the TOGAF principle, try to work on that. So some of them are reinforcing architecture principle. I'm thinking, architecture principles that tell you it's better not to double stir the data and stuff like that, or try to things that to say that you should have, I don't know, one solution to do one thing and not 10 of them and many things like that. Reduction of complexity makes totally sense with digital sustainability. All what concerns cost efficiency in terms of energy or in terms of equipment also makes sense, but probably, and I am going to make a link with the first conference introducing this open group, even with Ron Toledo, he called a less for less. I think his presentation was less for less. And I think as architects, we will have sometimes, and probably more often, to say no for digital deployments that don't bring so much value compared to the pollution they generate. So saying no is never easy. I think you know that as an architect. It's always easier to say, well, you can go on, but I think it's something we need to prepare and do it professionally and accurate. So I think I'm finished for today. So Andrew, I don't know, I leave you the...
Yeah, we will be hearing questions. Thank you very much, Celine.
My pleasure.
I think we want you to take a
Okay.
seat, because these mics are going to be live, aren't they? You've got a switch on. Is it just on there? Okay, good. Okay, yes, so we're going to do a panel now. What I'll do is I will walk around with the mic, shall I? And just if anybody's got a question, I can bring the mic to you. Okay, so Chris, you're going to join the panel. So anyway, who'd like to kick us off with a question? Put your hand up. Nobody? Questions for our panel? Oh, Michael's going to start us off with one. Good.
Thank you. Are you on the panel as well, Andrew?
I can be on the panel
Yes,
as well.
good. So it sort of applies to you and the panel. And it's really to do with the restructuring that we've done in 10. So we have the foundation and we have the series guides. The foundation is 60 years worth of basic understanding, running through enterprise architecture, through IBM Business Systems Planning, through Zachman, etc. We end up with the ADM and the content meta model as our two foundational models for organizing what we do. The series guides are examples of people saying how we could apply it. But they're just opinions, and often are contradictory with the foundation. So when we teach it, we look at sections in the foundation, sections in the series guide. They say different things, and that's fine, because the series guides are people taking stuff and saying, here's how we've applied it in certain situations. So does that represent some reality in the difference between the two? That's the first.
Well, if you're asking that to me, I think if you look at the series guides, they usually make it pretty clear when they are making, I guess, what you might call an interpretation of the standard. They're making it very clear that the standard may say that, you know, a stakeholder is X, Y, and Z, but in practice, in the series guides, in practice, what, based on their experience, you know, they treat it this other way. You know, I think.
No issue with that.
Yeah.
Except there may be 100 different experiences of doing it differently, which may all be equally valid. So the issue is the series guides are not the way we do it. They are a way that's been proved to be useful in certain circumstances. So when we teach it, we would like to go across all of those different alternatives and say, here's how we could apply it. This series guide says this series guide says that, here's the examples. And we can then take it back to the experience of the people who are actually sitting there, to what happens in their business, which may be very different to how some of the series guides have worked. So what I'm really getting at is that in the way that we're now structuring it, we've said the two are together in the standard. Yeah?
Well,
so the
everything is
foundation
now
and the
part of-
series guides
Yeah,
are now the standard.
They are now the standard,
Yeah.
yes.
I would say that, personally, I don't believe that to be true. I think that's a problem. I think what's in the series guides is extremely useful, but is particular opinion. They're two very different things, and I'm not sure we're clear on that. And then also, we'll talk later in other sessions about how that affects the training, a lot of the feedback that a lot of the trainers have given around this. So the question is, the series guides are really useful example experience of how to apply it in certain circumstances. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Is there a fundamental difference between the foundation section and the series guides? And how do we make that clear to people or is that a misunderstanding of what we've got? So it's about that fundamental structure of
I would argue that that's a fundamental misunderstanding. If you look at the TOGAF library, the TOGAF library goes through 3 stages. One is fundamentals. Here is a framework. Then there are 2 sets of guidance material. One is the TOGAF Series Guide, and one are the white papers. The design structure of the series guides versus a white paper. White paper, unquestionably opinion. When we do it really well, and I will happily admit we don't always do it really well, is ensure that the series guide goes through the appropriate levels of review so that the best practice is that it exists as a paper, a guide, and goes through multiple reviews before it becomes a TOGAF series guide and part of the standard. The other aspect is being very clear about the context and applicability of the series guide, which can either be very general, business capabilities, or can be very specific, business capabilities in an environmentally sustainable way for ICT, which is a very, very specific guide. The other aspect that we've got, the limitations of the contradictions inside.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that's how it's set out. I don't agree that's how the series guides have ended up. So there are things in series guides that many people disagree with.
So my advice then is go on the bug tracker and put a comment in. Until that's done, until that is done, nothing's going to change.
And I agree with that in the sense that what we don't have is the controlling mind yet. And there are some aspects of trying to get the controlling mind in place, which says, if we said A and B equals this, is that true? Have we got 2 different Bs? That's not really been done over the last few years. Because most of the reviews have been done by relatively small numbers of people, because that's the number of people that get involved in doing it. We only need 10 agreements to get a document passed. So what I'm making is the observation that the series guides and the foundation have different histories and different content. We've put them together and said they're sort of on parallel. I think this is not to say the series guides aren't useful. I think they're extremely useful. But I don't think they have the status of the foundation. And I think also when you teach it, the foundation allows you to then go out and talk about all these things in context really, really well.
Yeah. Well, I
the
think we're
series guide,
taking
you
a
get
slightly
drawn down
different
routes.
view on it this time. You know, we're actually addressing it. We looked at the standard and it's very broad now. So we're not saying, you know, let's teach everybody everything. So we've gone in and we focused, and we're actually drawing on the experience of the architects who put themselves forward to write these guides.
Agree.
You know, so what you're doing is members of the Architecture Forum have come to the Open Group. They have contributed their work. And so what we want to do with the teaching is actually to give that experience, to make that experience available to, you know, our students. And so they can look at it, it's more like, you know, what would that enterprise architect do in that situation given the guidance that is there? And you can put yourself in there. But as Dave pointed out very clearly, it's not necessarily prescriptive. Some of it will be in specific cases, some of it won't be. So again, I think there actually needs to be an adjustment from the training community to, you know, to take on board, you know, the approach that we're giving now. So it is different, I get that. We've got, you know, enterprise architect, business architect, agile specialist, digital specialist, EA leader. You know, we've done that purposely. We've broken the link between calling it TOGAF 9 something and TOGAF 10 something to focus specifically on skill sets and competencies. And it's about sort of getting people into the thinking mode. You know, I sometimes think, you know, maybe this is being unfair, that the trainers want a very black and white thing.
Well, the opposite. I mean, we usually train by taking clients' examples and go across hundreds of different things.
Yeah.
But
And there's
what
nothing
I'm
to
s-
stop you
what I'm saying
doing
is
that.
not just say what I'm saying is not the stuff's not useful, not that it's not providing a perspective. It absolutely is. It's been put together at the same level, and I think it's a different level. And I think that's what's causing some of the issues. Because also the people that we try and get to use the standard are working at many levels, from companies with hundreds of thousands of people to people with small companies, different environments, and we would apply these in very different ways. So the comment is, there's a whole discussion to have on that, which I'll put upon one side. It's that the structural change in 10 may have caused, I think, and a number of other people think, a problem in the way we can apply it and explain it. And
But
Yeah.
there could be ways of
the other
improving it.
thing, and I'll defer to Celine, just quickly say, get involved with the forum. Obviously, come and talk with the forum. We've got the chairs of the Architecture Forum here and in the room. So these are the people to come and get involved with and talk about.
Things in series guides, I don't expect other people to follow what I've done as the answer. I expect them to follow it as something to consider. And that's the flavour. I think there's more consideration in the series guides than the foundation. That's how we always looked at teaching in the past. I think that gives you the space to make it real for people and to pull out, particularly in examples where the series guides are absolutely spot on, giving you the real answer to this question to do things.
And
I just think it's two different types of information.
We've had at least one contradiction pointed out, and we've got some wording improvements in GitLab. Obviously, we need the Architecture Forum to progress some of those changes. Celine, you were going to say
No,
something.
I wanted no, because I am asked. When you author a TOGAF Series Guide, you try to ask yourself what is in your practice relevant to put in the TOGAF. So I think the exercise for me is very interesting. There is one thing I was saying when I was teaching is that standards are never finished. And people, when they come to a course, they would like to have the perfect standard. But standards are never finished, and this is why I call for participation to review and authoring, because I think we could be more dynamic on that. And when you see contradiction, I think it's very important that you send it, because we can improve the standard. And then when you say it is a specific opinion, yes, no, it's not the same level of the foundation of TOGAF, and I think the split between the foundation and the series guide is on purpose. I mean, it's not the same documents, but it represents, it has gone through all the process of the open group, and the people who author it try to reach a kind of universal consensus position on the topic, the number of people contributing. So this is also always an attempt to reach that, but it's never perfect and can be improved. So yeah, I don't totally agree with you when you see it's just personal views. It's more than that. It's not as universal as the core standard, but the aim is to provide a kind of standard guidance on a specific topic, for instance, on metadata management, like the one we did with the Information Architecture Forum. No, but I think your feedback is very, yeah. No, but it's very fair, and I think there is a lot of content that was added, which I think is great, but all this needs to be digested and maybe improved a little to reach a more comfortable level to teach.
Hello. Hi there. My name is Divine. I'm an independent consultant. I come from the Washington, D.C. area. What actually made me come to this summit is the EA for sustainability. Now, once in a while, the kind of work I do, I'm called in both on the private or public sectors to come in and address a business need as an architect, and sometimes that involves the entire enterprise. Sometimes it must just be part of the enterprise. Now, what I want to understand is, I have two questions actually for you, Ms. Celine, and everybody, anyone else that can help. How do you kick off a conversation on how this business needs that I want to address are going to affect the environment, and how do you get a buy-in from the customer? Because I mean, the customer thinks they think they have a problem, and they need someone to come and address the problem and need, or many problems or needs, and you come in and you start bringing conversations about the environment and sustainability. Then also, do we have some kind of tools that if you're planning to actually deliver or implement a solution, do you have any kind of tools that you can qualify or quantify the environmental impact of the entire implementation or deliverable? Those are my two questions.
Okay, maybe the first one I'm going to try to answer short, and maybe we can discuss also afterwards.
Yeah.
I think Dave said something during his presentation, is that you have to understand so if you are an independent, you take part to different enterprise, and it's very important to understand in which enterprise you land. Is it a small one, a big one, a medium one, and what is the business model? Depending on the business model of that organization, sustainability will not have the same flavor. So I'm working for an insurance company. Insurance company job is a risk, is to protect people, society, corporation, and addressing the environmental topic is quite natural in that context, because the more natural catastrophes you have, well, the more costly will be your insurance. If you are working, I don't know, in an energy company, I think it's totally different. So you will have to find out in the business model of the company you work for, how is it hit by the environmental risk, and how it will be hit by the environmental regulations that will come in the future. And then you will find, so there was also a very good presentation where people were explaining how you can get some value, also business value out of that. So I think it's many ideas for that. And I think the other question, can you repeat your last question? I had it in mind, but I...
Okay, the second question was about how you qualify, if there are any
tool.
tools.
Yeah, well, all the software providers at the moment are proposing some tooling for that. So yes, there are many tools and they are around measuring carbon footprint, so there are a lot of them. I think there was a presentation the days before where all the logo of the company proposing tooling was displayed, and there are a lot of them. So yes, tooling comes, but again, like all the time, we have tools, but we miss data, but that's yeah.
So when you're looking at tooling, there's a couple of places you could easily start. One, get an advanced copy of Celine's paper and read the system dynamic model of ICT cost. Second is look at scope 1, 2, and 3 and simply break scope 1, 2, and 3 down into the constituent parts and apply those constituent parts to your business model. Whether you're an energy company or a transportation company or an insurance company, you are going to have energy uses that you are in direct control of or indirect control of. Those are costs in your organization. Then when you're looking for gathering the information and comparing it, Open Footprint is great because it is providing a fundamental data model that says, here's a way to talk about it. Are you talking about megatons of carbon or grams of carbon? The number 4 has a huge difference.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
Let's guy looks like he'll ask a hard question.
No, this is an easy one. Fairly straightforward. Oh, first of all, my name is David George. I work with an insurance company. And going to digital sustainability, what do we think? This is probably mostly for small to medium-sized enterprises, where CTOs basically looking at their energy bills, and as a solution, basically moving from in-house data centers to sort of infrastructure as a service or platform as a service with public cloud companies. Do we see that as a viable solution? Because given, say, the main public cloud companies, we know what their energy sources may be, or is that just simply moving the problem?
So if you're looking at the advantage that you're going to have if you're trying to deal with your energy footprint by going to an external provider, is they're going to do all the math for you. And when you do your purchasing decisions, if you're paying attention to both their unit cost and their intensity measures, you're going to drive them as a customer into being more and more efficient. And you'll see that with the large providers now switching their energy sources over to renewables as fast as they can in as many places as they can to deal with that. So, but that's only part of your equation and part of your value and where you choose to spend. Because if it really matters to you, you are probably going to be able to build an on-prem footprint that is more energy effective than a shared environment, but you're then going to have to take the accountability to get everything right. And if you're not prepared to do that work, going to a common provider who is by market driven to be effective enough will save you time. Did I misstate anything for you?
No, it's good. Thanks for. So maybe you have part of the answer on the diagram I show, because the hyperscale data center are more efficient than the on-prem one. But if your volume is exploding, I mean, if the fact it's a lot easier or at the beginning only cheaper, because you will see I mean, the question of the cost, I think with the rise of energy cost is going to appear also in that area. From my point of view, I think it's already appearing in some area. But so you have to take care of your volumes. At the end, if your volume are in an exponential growth, your pollution will grow also. And sometimes, so it is a change in practice from your on-prem to the cloud. The way to monitor the volume and the consequence for you are a bit different. So you need to adapt on that. And there is a risk because it's easy to activate that your volume really increase. So that's a point. And the other point is that it's quite easy to measure on what you operate because you have the electricity bill. We miss some transparency on some indicators from the hyperscaler, and so it's today effectively difficult to really compare strictly the things. So we need to improve on transparency, but this is the purpose of open footprint and so on. So I think the market is organizing itself to go in that direction. So it's not a yes/no. It's you know.
So we'll probably start to see the differences based on scale. So possibly the smaller enterprises might sort of benefit from just moving over to that service rather than trying to sort of invest or take on the expense of being more sustainable.
It gets to how critically important it is and your levers of control. If it really matters to your business, than you being on, you select an on-prem that's appropriate. You select an on-prem power source that is appropriate. You design your on-prem infrastructure to be as energy efficient as possible. You design your environment so that you have no wasted systems. But that's all work you're going to choose to do. If that work isn't worth it for you, if there's not enough return either in cost savings or in market opportunity, and I'm going to be really clear, don't always look at this as a cost, because you may be choosing to do it for market positioning. There was an excellent presentation, I forget, and I don't know Sammy's last name.
It was Sami Lanksmannen, something like that. You mean?
Yes.
It was yesterday.
Yesterday, I think it was even in this room. He did a fascinating presentation on how you can use your sustainability approach for generating additional value. So it's not always a cost. You can increase the market share value point of your product if your customers care.
So I guess if this is sustainability values are more pervasive than just the digital aspect of the business, if it's you know ingrained throughout the entire enterprise, and the priority is quite high for sustainability. Yep. That's where you know you would sort of
and recognize where. Look at scope 1, 2, 3. Look at where your sources of consumption are. If you're flying people all over the earth, your data center's probably not at the top of the list.
Thank you.
I think of that one personally because years ago, when carbon sources were brand new, my young son, he's no longer young at the time, they were doing a chart of carbon footprint. And at the time, I lived in Western Canada, and I was commuting to Brazil for work. So they put up this bar chart on the wall about everybody's family's carbon footprint, and then there was this one giant, top floor to bottom, black, that went across a couple of panels.
So you have a problem with your son.
Well, no, he separated me from our family.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll call it an end there because we need to break for lunch and there are other sessions starting at 2 o'clock. So I'd like to thank Dave, Celine, Chris, and Andrew. If you could show your appreciation.
Thank you.
And the quickest way to lunch is down those stairs, and most of the user guides are actually on one of the tables downstairs. If you haven't grabbed them already, please go and get them. Thank you.